Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Dailies, where we give you updates of happenings from the Nigerian newspaper. I am Stella Elisha Dasham. You can join us through Facebook, YouTube, drop your comment, your views, and your own opinions concerning any of the stories we will be looking at this morning from the front page of the papers. I will be doing the program alongside Rachel Tansy. Good morning.
Morning, Stella.
All right, let's go straight into the papers, starting with the Daily Independent newspaper.
The big story on Daily Independent: Borno bomb attacks. Fight against terrorism must be total, uncompromising, coming from the ACF. You can start with the details on the front page. Customs intercept 844 rifles, 112,500 ammunition in rivers. The writer says arrest 3, CG vows they will face full wrath of the law. Nigeria's capital importation rose by 210% in the first quarter of 2024, a report from the National Bureau of Statistics. INEC lists 142 recommendations to improve electoral process. Details can be found on page 7. Court dismisses Nnamdi Kanu's ₦1 billion rights suit against federal government. RSIEC fixes October 5 4 Rivers cancel elections. Unmanned aerial vehicle, not helicopter crash, NAV clarifies. Details can be found on page 7. Federal government debunks report of explosion at Zungeru power plant. Details can be found on page 6. Still on the paper, Nigeria police force wasn't established to succeed, coming from Senate leader. Canvasses decentralized police model as antidote to insecurity. Ukraine foils Russian-backed coup. Details can be found on page 6, and that's all the news on Daily Independent newspaper.
On First News newspaper, coming from Sheikh Hussaini, warning Tinubu, avoid Buhari's nepotistic appointment and mistakes. Detail of that can be found in the paper. Tragic crash claimed 25 lives on Kano Zaria Expressway. More detail of that human angle story can be found in the paper. Fake alcoholic beverages, NAFDA shut down 100 shops in Enugu. So this is a warning before you purchase something. Do well to be sure that the NAFDA number on it is actually there. Here we're seeing that a lot of beverages are circulating that are actually fake. So do make sure that you check what you consume. Still on First News newspaper, alleged 80 billion naira fraud. CSO odds swift persecution of Yahaya Bello. And on 121.86 trillion naira debt, Obi demand transparency in Nigerians' borrowing spree. And the big news on the paper, rivalry intensifies. Wike vow to unseat Senator Kingibe in 2027. Court dismisses Nnamdi Kanu's ₦1 billion human rights suit against federal government. U.S. Supreme Court rules Trump partially immune from criminal persecution. Custom intercept arms, ammunition, drugs from Turkey worth 4 billion naira. And here we have Rivers set date for local government election amid ongoing crisis. We will recall that they said they will do just that, and they have actually set the date for that. And we have the picture story where we can see the Vice President Kashim Shettima visit the Borno bomb blast victim in the hospital, and that's all on First News newspaper.
On the Matrix newspaper, Nigeria's foreign investment inflow rises by 210% to $3.37 billion in the first quarter of 2024. On Euro 2024, Portugal, France survived Slovenia, Belgium hurdles to soar into the quarter-final. Details can be found on page 16. Labour Party's chieftain calls for cabinet reshuffling concerning the economy, demands cabinet of 35% technocrats, 45% politicians, 20% bureaucrats. You can find details on page 3. Court finds AFCC 3 million naira for declaring Emefiele's wife wanted. Customs confirms massive seizure of rifles, live ammunition illegally imported at One port. Details can be found on page 3. The big story: Borno horrific bombings, death toll surges. Vice President Shettima visits Borno, described incident as pathetic, makes donations to Maiduguri bomb victims. Police, army begin clearance operations. Details can be found on page 3, and also a picture story showing the Vice President at the hospital visiting the victims of the bomb blast. Still on the Matrix newspaper, Kingibe's Senate seat under threat as Wike vows to block re-election. Several trapped as Abuja hotel building collapses. Rivers Electoral Commission faces October 5th for conduct of LG polls. You can find more details on page 9. And then we have an entertainment story. Toyin Ibrahim allegedly locked up ex-user who wished her son dead. Details can be found on page 14. And that's all the news on the Matrix newspaper.
On Daily News Hub newspaper, talking about Borno bombing, death toll rises to 32 as Shettima pays condolence visit. 14 injured person discharged from the hospital. More detail of that can be found in the paper. And on 2027, Wike takes on Abuja. Only senator vows to unseat her. Says if you are angry people are praising us, go and hang yourself on a transformer. If you are popular, run in 2027. We will fail you. This is my territory. More detail of that can be found in the paper. Custom intercept container carrying 13.9 billion naira arms from Turkey. And on 2025 UTME registration, JAM to launch customized SIM for candidates. Also, we have River Selection Body fixed date for local government poll. And then shady transaction, I quit Global Bank to protect my integrity. Shady transaction, I quit Global Bank to protect my integrity. This is coming from a former IT personnel. Internet subscription hit, okay, that story is not quite clear, but you can find that on the front page of the paper. Meet 103-year-old Tanzanian woman who waited years to meet her white boyfriend. You can find that story in the paper. Northerners serving in Tinubu's government now mere cheerleaders, coming from the ex-APC vice chairman, Shettima, Rubado, Akume, and others says we are all like Tinubu's protocol officers. And downside of the paper, court dismisses Nnamdi Kanu's 1 billion naira suit. More detail of that story can be found in the paper, and that's all on the front page of the paper.
On New Telegraph, the big story: terrorism, declare total uncompromising war on Boko Haram and criminal element. ACF tells federal government. Says attack on soft targets in Borno bears telltale terror strategies of extremist group. State police will mitigate nation security challenges. A statement from the Senate leader. We're not considering new military base in West Africa. U.S. admits pulling out of Niger made Sahel region less safe. You can find details on page 2 and 28. From CBN, currency in circulation increases by 8.5% to 3.97 trillion naira. You can start with the details on the front page. Capital importation rises by 198% to $3.37 billion. A report from FDIS. Details can be found on page 8. Tinubu approves Benue Taraba link bridge. Details can be found on page 8 and 29. INEC will make 2023 general election report public soon. An assurance from Yakubu. Concerning the Olubadan marking day constitutes coronation committee for Alelu Queen. You can find details on page 29. Trump has some immunity from persecution. Supreme Court rules. Details can be found on page 4. Still on New Telegraph, drone not helicopter crashed in Kaduna. Details can be found on page 3. Timmy Frank to Apabio, don't provoke Kenyan style revolves in Nigeria. 80% of Nigerians can afford housing mortgage. A statement from the minister. Details can be found on page 28. Apabio Abbas to ECOWAS, tackle terrorism, climate change, bad governance now. Wike Kingibe face off, you won't come back in 2027, statement from the ex-Rivers governor. Minister almost acting as FCT governor says FCT senator. You can find details on page 4. Customs seizes 844 rifles, 12,500 ammunition, other contraband at One port. Arrest 3 over 13.9 billion naira contraband. Details can be found on page 3. We have a study that says parental smoking linked to multiple sclerosis risks. Details can be found on page 26, and that's all the news on New Telegraph newspaper.
On the Daily Times newspaper, INEC has no power to conduct local government election, coming from Yakubu, says unless necessary constitutional amendments are made, INEC will only continue to organize national and state elections. Commission proposed 142 recommendations to improve the electoral process. More detail of that can be found on page 2. How custom intercept rifles, ammunition, drug at Oni port. This is coming from Adeniyi, and we can see the picture story showing us some of the things, the ammunition and the arms, and also some illicit drugs and second-hand clothes that actually they were able to intercept. Here we can see them inspecting that. Still on Daily Times newspaper, court dismisses Nnamdi Kanu's 1 billion naira human rights suit against DSS. No explosion at Danguru hydroelectric power stations, coming from the police. Federal government to establish housing fund for indigent Nigerians, coming from the minister. Court frees man after 15 years in prison without trial. Edo's employment process is fairest, most inclusive in Nigeria, says Obaseki, that is the governor of Edo State. You can find more detail of that on page 5, and that's all on Daily Times newspaper.
On Daily Struggle newspaper, we have the big story. Federal government urges action. ECOWAS seeks $2.6 billion yearly for regional anti-terror forces. You can see page 3 for details. TJ Media Center aids inmates, VVF patients, and orphanage with food and funds. You can see page 10 for more details. Insecurity worsened under Buhari compared to Tinubu. A statement from Shehu Sani. Details can be found on page 6. Labour slams governors. Your ignorance on minimum wage is outstanding. You can find details on page 13. Why some Heritage Bank customers are yet to be paid, coming from NDIC. Northern governors condemn Goza attacks, urge unity against terrorists. A picture story where we can see the Minister of Finance and Defense of ECOWAS member state at the meeting in Abuja. That's all the news on Daily Struggle newspaper.
On Nigerian News Direct, on banditry, Ogun police confirm attack on Sagamu Ajebu Odebini Road. You can find that detail on page 6. Federal government inaugurate governing council institution July 4th. And here, coming from the NCDBM, they are saying we are on track to achieve 70% local content penetration. Wike Kingibe face-off on infrastructural development in the FCT. And the big news on the paper, federal government terminates road contracts over alleged non-performance. Lagos government empowers 500,000 businesses with 10 billion naira, create jobs for residents in 8 years. And on Kano Emirate Fuel, group calls on U.S. to impose visa ban on Governor Yusuf and others. You can find more detail of why they are calling for that on page 6. And we have a picture story as well on the front page. You can do well to get the paper and read more detail of any of the story that is of interest to you.
On Daily Sun newspaper, court dismisses Kanu's 1 billion naira suit against the federal government. On a port, Rivers Customs impounds 844 rifles worth 4.17 billion naira duty. And the writer says 112,500 rounds of ammunition also intercepted. Details can be found on page 25. Gunmen shoot one, abduct 20 in Ogun. Borno bomb attack, death toll now 32. VP visits Gwaza victims. Details can be found on page 5 and 6. Pandemonium as explosion rocks Zungeru hydroelectric dam in Niger. Details can be found on page 4. On minimum wage, 26 states may be unable to pay, budget data reveal. Details can be found on page 23. Summit to develop new strategies for regional growth, says Commission's boss. This is coming from the NDDC. Details can be found on page 27. ECOWAS set up committee to settle Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger dispute. Details can be found on page 28. Concerning the Olubadan Makinde Constitute Coronation Committee, details can be found on page 29. We have a picture story where we can see the Speaker, House of Representatives, Tajuddin Abbas. We can see Minister of Federal Capital Territory Yeson Wike. We can see Minister of State FCT Maria Mahmoud, Managing Director Planet Project Limited Abiodun, and others during the official inauguration of the construction of Mabushi Bus Terminal in Abuja. This happened yesterday, and that's all the news on Daily Sun newspaper.
On the Punch newspaper, federal government revokes 870 billion naira road contracts. 2,270 projects suffer delay, with detail found on page 2. Kano plans appeal after losing 1 billion naira suit against the federal government. And coming from Yakubu Mamu, he's saying INEC lacks the power to conduct local government election. You can find more detail of that in the paper. Borno bumping death toll hits 32. 14 survivors have been discharged. More detail found on page 12. And on Dangote fuel, marketers fear high-priced petrol ahead of supply. Crude oil will determine the cost of Dangote. PMS, Dampman, and Ipman warning the federal government. Imported crude maize production costs higher may affect the petrol price coming from Dangote. So we will record, they said they will start setting by the 3rd week of July. So our fingers are crossed, even though concerns are maybe the price will be higher because Dangote is buying this petrol at the crude oil actually at a very high price. So you can find more detail of all those conversations on page 21. Customs seizes 18 billion naira firearms. Drugs from Turkey recovers 844 rifles. Recapitalization, bank directors acquire 39 billion naira shares. And we have 27 killed, others injured in Kano, Ogun auto crashes. Lagos Ogun top as internet users hit 164 million. More detail found on page 26, and that's all on the Punch newspaper.
On the Nation newspaper, 1 million applicants seek 1.3 trillion naira consumer credit loan. Customs impounds 844 rifles, 112,500 ammunition, drugs. 40-foot evil container brought in from Turkey. You can find details on page 2. And then we have an information from the Federal Ministry of Works where we can see a map showing the 1,000 kilometer Sokoto Badagry and Sopa highway, where you can see where it starts and where it's going to end on the map, and that's all the news on the Nation newspaper.
On the Guardian newspaper, legacy debt among operators stifle telecommunications sector and service delivery. Court orders release of man after 15 years in prison without charge and trial. Capital importation rises by 198% in 1 year as FDI lags. Borno bumping death toll rises to 31 according to the Guardian. Federal government terminates contracts with Mothercard, then Tata orders over non-performance. You can find detail of that on page 7. Journalists arbitrary arrest, detention, and despotism. You can find that on page 12 and editorial. PwC raises concern over Nigeria's 121.6 trillion naira debt and the rising deficit. 25 died, 53 injured in Kano trailer accident, and I just hope something needs to be done about the numbers of people we keep losing to road accident. We saw the previous paper or so, Rachel, where we're seeing the number of people that died in Ogun State as well as others as a result of this road accident, and it's quite pathetic. And I wonder, I think you and I have said this over and over, measures that need to be put in place what the federal road safety need to do to make sure people are adhering to certain regulation, and then even as a state, what we can do. There are states where they have made a regulation times where we have these trucks that ply in the road. I think that to some extent will reduce the number of casualties we have. So I'm hoping that we see a more proactive measure coming from the government as well as the body that have been put in place to make sure that we reduce this number of accidents. Especially we see this one that happened around the Kano Zaria road, and we know a number of times we've had accidents as well on that same road. I remember those people we lost, I think last year, the immigration, it was still on that same axis that they had an accident where we lost some of promising men on that road. So I'm hoping something needs to be done about our roads, as well as even certain regulation for all of these traders and all of that apply the road around this particular time, so that we can reduce the number of casualties.
I think when it comes to highway crashes, it's more of a preventive measures that need to be taken. And when you look at some of the road safety measures that need to be put in, it's not only about signs that speed kills or all of that. It's also ensuring that there's something that monitors people from overspeeding, because yes, speed kills, and the truth about certain situation is that if everybody would have been driving on the expected speed limit, some accident will not be as fatal as they ended up to be. That is the truth about it. When you see the impact, you know that it's only speed that could have caused that kind of impact. Even when you see people on their own, very fatal accident that you don't see any other vehicle involved, just this person, and you know it can be nothing but speed. Those preventive measures is that when we are having our highway patrol, speed control should be part of it also. Not like I'm trying to take us far or anything, but this is something that I think that the Nigerian road safety, the Nigerian government can implement and make it possible. I know road transport service providers that do have speed limits in their vehicles, and for years they have been very safe. For years, I used them for years when I was in school traveling, and we can almost say 100% safety. The most I've encountered on the road was a flat tire, but nothing more, not a near accident situation of all of that, because this company was able to implement speed limit. You don't have to leave it to be at the discretion of the driver, whether he wants to drive at a normal speed or not. These are certain things we implement and we put them into action so that we save lives. So I just hope that we have authorities, we have the government, we have the federal road safety going the extra mile to see that, you know what, we won't be there. We will not be always on the road checking the tires, checking the this, the brakes and that. But what are the things we are putting in place that even if we are not there, people will be safe, and someone's recklessness or carelessness will not be the result that so many lives are gone.
You know, you just mentioned one of the transport you've actually used, and then you could actually testify how safe. And I think this is where we need certain transport companies to top up and actually do something. Make sure that your drivers are alert, make sure that they adhere to certain regulations and all of that. And no wonder we have the speed limit, so you should know the speed limit you should use on the highway and all of that. Make sure you know when to go through the bends and all of that. Certain things are very, very important. Still on the Guardian newspaper, we have Nigerian police wasn't established to succeed, Senate leader says. So you should ask why the Senate leader is saying that Nigerian police wasn't established to succeed. Federal government no longer interested in Nigerians' air, ET affirms. So you can find detail of that news on page 4, and that's all on the Guardian newspaper.
On this day newspaper, the big story is a This Day report, why Nigeria needs new presidential jet. Last aircraft bought by Obasanjo used by 4 Nigerian leaders. Any unforeseen circumstances will have national implication, findings reveal. You can find the details on page 9. At the top of the paper, non-bank financial institutions key to regional integration and economic stability. A report from Cardoso declares increasing transaction volumes by fintechs pose major risks to financial system. Court slams 3 million naira on AFCC for unlawfully declaring Emefiele's wife wanted. Details can be found on page 25. Fight against terrorism must be total, uncompromising. MNJTF kills 70 terrorists. More details can be found on page 15. This is a statement from ACF. U.S. Supreme Court: Trump has absolute immunity for official act. Decision should end all of crooked Joe Biden's witch hunt against me, says former president. You can start with the details on the front page and continue on page 9. Custom intercepts 844 arms unit, 12,500 ammunition worth 13.9 billion naira at One Port. Details can be found on page 5. We have a picture story where we can see Nigeria advances renewable energy tech volume chain localization, where we can see from left to right the former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, former US Secretary of State John Kerry, and Special Presidential Envoy on Climate Action. We have Chief Ngalale, who presented a position at Leadership Roundtable on the sideline of the Global Energy Transition Congress in Milan, Italy. This happened yesterday, and that's all the news on this day newspaper.
Right before we continue with other paper review, we would love to take a break. So when we come back, we will continue with the paper review. Please stay tuned with us.
Make your everyday informative, make your everyday count. Know your world, daily affairs, national and international, with authentic news events as they unfold on Global News and Zoom on Nigeria, Monday to Friday at 1 p.m.
Thanks for staying tuned. It's still the Dailies. We have been looking at a number of stories on the paper, looking at the custom intercepting some of the ammunition and drugs that came in illegally, and as well we are seeing the clash or the rivalry between Wike and the Senator Kingibe, where he's promising by 2027 she won't be back on seat. So quite a number of stories on the paper. You can join us by dropping your comment, your views on any of the story. I still have Rachel with me. Thank you so much, Rachel.
You're welcome, Sarah.
All right, we shall continue the paper review, and let's take a look at the Leadership newspaper. Electricity disconnection. Ministers, top officials abandon offices, work from home. Federal Secretariat in darkness. Workers resort to generating set solar sources. And we have the Abuja Electric Distribution Company mom on the situation, so you can find more detail of why we are having our MDAs not having light and they are resolving to working at home. More detail found on page 4. 25 die in Kano Zaria road crash. That can be found on page 6. Cardoso urged stronger anti-money laundering law. That can also be found on page 21. And we have a Federal Ministry of Work Public Service announcement, invitation to stakeholders engagement on the Renew Hope Legacy Road Infrastructure Project, which we can see about a 1,000 kilometer Sokoto-Badagry superhighway. You can find more detail of the venue, the time, and all that will be happening in the various states. And that's all on the Leadership newspaper.
On Blueprint newspaper, ACF senators forums condemn Borno terror attack. RMRDC boss charges institutions on impactful research. Rangers grab teenage kid dynamite in Bilo. You can find details on page 33. NAFDAC seals 100 shops in Enugu over fake alcoholic beverages. Details can be found on page 15. Custom intercepts over 4 billion naira worth of rifles, ammunition at One. You can start with the details on the front page. The big story, INEC proposes 142 recommendations for improved electoral process to intensify engagement with National Assembly on electoral reform, says Anambra Guba holds 2025, Ekiti Osun 2026, FCT Council polls 2. ECOWAS standing force will confront existential threat. This is coming from Tory. Akpabio tax regions parliament on collaboration. You can start with the details on the front page. Rising volume of non-bank transaction worries the Central Bank of Nigeria. Details can be found on page 21. Nigeria's capital importation hit $3.37 billion. Federal government commits to 15 trillion Lagos-Calabar coastal highway. Details can be found on page 9. Lawmakers to amend TET Fund Act for easy access to fund. Details can be found on page 20. These are all the major news on Blueprint newspaper.
All right, let's take a look at the Vanguard newspaper. Retail sale volume down by 50% in 1 year, coming from supermarket owners. You can find more detail on page 19. Federal government sacked 3 contractors handling Obajani Bini Road. And on 2024 Hajj, how the federal government and 8 states splash 100.6 billion naira on pilgrims. Also, we are having economic crisis. Slum import operation puts 40,000 jobs at risk. This is an investigation, with the writer saying cargo import drops by 20%, containerized goods 30%, and vehicles 55% as vessel calls reduce. Vessel that brought in 4,000 containers now come with 300. Terminal operators, shipping companies, and others in dilemma. Labor worries over workers' fate. More detail of all that is happening can be found on page 5. And on the SDG, 63% of Nigerians still wallowing in poverty. This is coming from Tinubu's aid, where we are looking at a number of Nigerians can no longer have a balanced diet or a healthy meal. So this is really a lot. So you need to look into that on page 9. And here we are having Shetima visit as ACF Southern senators want the action against terror. Custom impounds container load of rifles from Turkey at Uni. And on sport, Lukman shines in Ghana Football Award in Accra. You can find more detail on page 30, and that's all on the Vanguard newspaper.
On Nigerian Tribune, the major stories: Wike Kingibe in war of what? He is not working for FCT people, senator says. You won't return to Senate, Wike replies. Details can be found on page 3. Trump has some immunity for official acts, U.S. Supreme Court rules. You can find details on page 2. The big story, Borno bombing death toll now 32. Terrorist merchants must be stopped. Statement from ACF. Intensify effort in combating terrorism. Southern senators tell federal government. We shall seek justice for the victims and bereaved. Coming from Northern senators. Details can be found on page 3. INEC proposes 142 recommendations to improve electoral process, says it has no power to conduct LG election. No explosion in Zungeru power plant. Assurance from the federal government. Details can be found on page 4. Court frees 12 Ajayi Crowther University students facing murder charge. Details can be found on page 8. Customs seizes 844 rifles, 112,500 ammunition in Rivers Port. Federal government terminates Obajana Benin Road contract. You can find details on page 25, and that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
All right, let's take a look at the Teen Trust newspaper. And on Teen Trust, we have expert canvas adoption of AI in education. And here also meet the winners of Season 2 MTN Champs Ibadan. You can find that, and this is coming from the Anglican Comprehensive High School, emerged as the winners in the girls category of Season 2 of MTN Champs by actually a total points of about 53 points. So really kudos to the students. Still on Teen Trust newspaper, we have 2 students of education destined second win state competition. We have column on lifestyle that you can find on page 7, another on career on page 5, well-being on page 14, and then short stories on page 10. And that's all on Teen Trust newspaper.
On Punch Sport Extra, Super Z, Charlotte set third record with Bay FC. You can find details on page 6. Arsenal returned for Osimhen after Rivers clear air on Finidi rumor. Omero enjoying early Kassim Passa preseason. Details can be found on page 7. We have France winning 1-2 Belgium. We have Fortejen own goal ends Devil's dream. Costa spares Seleco's blushes in shootout. You can find details on page 8, where we have Portugal winning with penalties against Slovenia. City to hijack United Brentford move. We have Barclay joins Villa. Details can be found on page 5. Chelsea Newcastle made over Gordon. Lazio resumed Greenwood talks. Details can be found on page 2. Biles qualifiers for Olympics. You can find details on page 8. Mercedes bus hurt by Hamilton exit. Details can be found on page 8. Sabalenka withdraws from Wimbledon. You can find details on page 8, and that's all the news on Punch Sport Extra.
Right, let's take a look at Business Day newspaper. CBN reform drive investment inflow to 4-year high. Capital triples to $3.4 billion in 1 year. Anambra, Ogun, Kaduna, others record no investment. You can find more detail of that on page 30. Airline staff turned cash in on plane shortage. Ticket racketeering booms. You can find that in the paper. Kogi, Kano, or your others will struggle to pay the new minimum wage, says a report. And we have business activity hit 7-month low as output slows. Give jobs to Nigerian firms with capacity. Nesto boss urges the federal government, which you can find inside the paper on page 7. And that's all on Business Day newspaper, as well as how far we can go on the program this morning. Thank you, Rachel, for doing this.
You're welcome, Sally.
And also thank you to our viewers, the entire crew, and every other person for making this program a success. We look forward again to doing this tomorrow. Do have a great day ahead.